Okay, so we're holding on the Tezvavim and Beis in the bottom, 2 lines from the bottom. We're going to do the daf for Tezayin. Today is Tezayin. Chagiga. Says the Gemara as follows. We're finishing up today the sugya of Pardes of the 4 Tanoim who went into the Pardes. Ben Zoma and Ben Azai were affected in their own ways. Acher went off the derech, it seemed. Maybe he did tshuva, maybe he didn't do tshuva. Yerushalmi Bavli is machlekes. Rabbi Akiva seemed to not only enter b'shalom, he was yatsa b'shalom. He was able to it says Allah b'shalom, v'yard b'shalom, as we'll see in a minute. So the Gemara is going to finish off the discussion today about Rabbi Akiva, and we're going to move on. Today we have a little bit more agadata till the bottom of Tezayin Amud Aleph. We'll get to the Mishnah. We'll discuss a little bit the halachas of smicha of a carbon. We'll get to that in a minute. And the Mirza Shem will pick up from here as we finish Masechta Chagiga. Says the Gemara, 2 lines in the bottom, Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, Allah b'shalom v'yard b'shalom. It said in the Brayso that he was able to enter and exit the Pardes, the understanding of Chachmas Haboire and Maisa Bereshis, Maisa Merkava, and he was able to exit unscathed. The pasuk says about him, Mashkeni Achrech Narutza, that Mashkeni, it says, which it's in Shir Hashirim, Mashkeni, Hashem is saying, or we're saying, pull me towards you, Achrecha Narutza, I will run after you, so to speak, that this is referring to Rabbi Akiva. This pasuk Kiyadua is talking about the Achdus between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, and the idea is that Rabbi Akiva, who was able to be Ma'ached, the Mayim, the Al-Yonim, and the Mayim Tachtainim, as we spoke earlier, unlike Acher, who saw 2 Rishiyos, Rabbi Akiva was able to see only one. The Kayach of Achdus, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, was what Rabbi Akiva took with him to be able to get out of the Pardes what was supposed to be gotten out of it. It says over here that the angels wanted to even hurt Rabbi Akiva or push him out of the Pardes. HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, leave this Zaken, specifically a Zaken. Why? Because he was old enough to go into the Pardes, which, according to many Mefarshim, is the reason why Ben Azai and Ben Zoma were unable to survive it like Rabbi Akiva, was that they were too young. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva, who was a Zaken, he was able to succeed. That it wasn't Chas Shalom a chesaron in Ben Zoma and Ben Azai in their chachma, in their tzidkus, in their chassidus. It was a chesaron in their age. They shouldn't have gone in. But therefore, this Zaken was allowed to stay there. Sheroy lishtamish b'kvodi, Hashem says it's appropriate for Rabbi Akiva to use Hashem's kavod, so to speak, and therefore he belongs there. It says the Gemara, my Darash. What was the drush? Rashi speaks out of 2 different pshatim here. We'll say the first pshat. Rashi says, Mehechon Haven Mokum Hashchina Shenizar Shalei Hitzitsham. How did Rabbi Akiva know exactly where to see and not see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, so that he shouldn't be vulnerable to what happened to the other 3? Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. He says it comes from the pasuk V'asim Merivos Kodesh. Merivos is referring to the multitudes, the myriads, whatever the word is. It's referring to the malachim, and V'asa, which is an Aramaic word, which usually is not found in psukim in the Chumash, and yet the pasuk says V'asa Merivos Kodesh Miyamina Yesh Das Lamai. The asa here can be understood then to mean Aleph Taf as ois. Therefore, ois hu b'rivava shalo, there was a certain sign or a symbol there. That was what Rabbi Akiva used. Rabbi Avahu Amar Dagel Mervava, the pasuk says, Dugma hu b'rivava shalo, there's an example. Again, the idea is that he was able to identify a place of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he wasn't supposed to look. V'reish Lakish Amar, from a different pasuk, Hashem Tzvakais Shemai. There's a girsa here, over here is a question on the girsa, but the understanding here is Adon hu b'tzva shalai, meaning Hashem, which is spoken out, b'loshen adnus, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, and since it's spoken that way, the understanding here is that it's the adnus of the Adon hu b'tzva shalai of his army. Again, the idea is that he stands out. Rabbi Chia bar Ava, Rabbi Yochanan Loi Beruach Hashem, that's talking about a pasuk about Hashem is passing by. It's a pasuk in Malachim. To see the whole pasuk inside, it says V'yomer say, go out ve'amanata bahar, and go stand on the mountain, lifnei Hashem, in front of Hashem. V'hine Hashem oiver, and you see that Hashem is passing. V'ruach gedola, and there's a great wind, v'chazak, and strong, that is mefarek harim and shabris slaim, is breaking up the mountains and the stones and all the rocks. Lifnei Hashem, in front of Hashem. Now loy beruach Hashem, Hashem is not in the ruach. He's not in the ruach for achra ruach rosh, and after that there's the earthquake. V'loi b'rosh Hashem. Hashem is not in the earthquake. The Acher Harosh after the earthquake is Eish, and Loi be'Eish Hashem. The Acher Ha'Eish Kol Demamadaka, and that is really where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, so to speak. Again, it doesn't mean that Hashem's Chas V'Shalom not in other places. It just means that the Kol Demamadaka is the place where Hashem exists. And what it's saying is that V'hinei Hashem Oiver, Hashem is passing over there, and the Kol Demamadaka is the expression in the pasuk of the Kiviyachol where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. And Rabbi Akiva was able to understand that the Kol Demamadaka, which we always refer to the shofar as the Kol Demamadaka, as the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that was how Rabbi Akiva was able to know where to go and where not to go inside the paradise, so that he was able to escape unscathed. With this Gemara here, we end the conversation as it relates to the Daled that were nichnas the paradise. There's a lot more to say on this, but we'll continue the Gemara. Tanur Rabban, the Rise says, "Shishad Dvarim Nemra B'Sheidim." From one very lofty idea to another very lofty idea. We're talking about demons. We're talking about the mazikin. There are 6 things said about them. Shlosha Kamalachei Hasharis, and in 3 senses, they have characteristics like angels. Shlosha Kabnei Adam, and in 3 ways, they are like human beings. Shlosha Kamalachei Hasharis, Yesh Lahem Kanafayim. The first thing is they have wings. Kamalachei Hasharis, like angels. V'tasim Misoifa Olam Ba'ad Soifa Kamalachei Hasharis, and they fly from one place in the world to the other place in the world, from one end of the world to the other, meaning to say they have the ability to go anywhere they want, meaning anywhere that Hashem sends them. They also have the idea of the future, which sounds to me like they have knowledge of the future. That can't be. So the Gemara says, before we continue on talking about the other 3 things that they're like human beings in, let's just first understand this last one of the idea of the future. What does it mean they know the future? Could that possibly be? We know nobody knows the future except Hashem. They have the ability to hear what's going on behind the curtain, so to speak, where when things are being commanded by Hashem of what to do and what not to do, they're able to get a little bit of a heads up on what's going to happen, but not that they have a long-term view of what's going to actually happen. It says the Gemara, the Brisa continued and said, that 3 of them, 3 things are Shadim are like human beings. They eat like Bnei Adam. Mefarshim speak out here. It means a spiritual eating. I think the Ramban and the Rabbeinu Bechaye bring in Chumash that it's talking about maybe the smell of the fire and the vapor of water. Very hard to understand what that means, but on some level, demons are an in-between human and in-between malach, angels and humans, that on some level they have these characteristics that they eat, or they need nourishment. They can't just survive on spirit alone. Either way, it says part of the Rabban Kibnei Adam, they also seem to procreate, which is, again, a difficult thing to understand. They are corporeal. They don't have any physical body. Umeisim Kibnei Adam, and they die, meaning they end their existence like Bnei Adam. Either way, says the Brisa, a new Brisa, Shishad Dvarim Nemra B'Bnei Adam. This is significantly more relevant for us. There are 6 things spoken about human beings, and in 3 ways that we are Shlosha Kamalachei Hasharis, like angels, Shlosha Kabehema. What are the 3 ways that we are like Malachei Hasharis? Shlosha Kamalachei Hasharis, Yesh Lahem Das. We have Das Kamalachei Hasharis. We have intellect. And we walk upright, not on all 4s, like Malachei Hasharis. And we speak. Just we have the Ruach Memal, the ability to speak. That makes us like Malachei Hasharis. Maybe B'Lashon HaKodesh Davka, because we know what Gemara says that Malachei Hasharis speak specifically in Lashon Kodesh, and that they don't really understand Lashon Aramis, which is not clear if that's the case or not. But the point is that those 3 things make us similar to the angels. And in Shlosha Gebehema, in 3 ways, we're like animals. Oichlin v'shoising Gebehema, meaning this is our guf, our physicality, that we eat and drink like animals. We part of a Rabban Gebehema, and we need to procreate like animals. Umotzi and Rei Gebehema, and we use the bathroom like animals. Either way, it says the Gemara Weiler, it said in the Mishnah, anyone who stares at 4 things, better that he should have never been brought into the world. And it mentioned Malamala, Malamata, Malafnim, Mala Acher. Ask the Gemara, Bishlam, Malamalo, Malamata, Mala Acher. The things that are referring to not being choker, asking questions about what's above you and what's below you. Mala Acher, what happened, what's going to happen in the future. L'chayai, that makes sense. These are things one can't possibly comprehend, and therefore learning about them could lead someone to either go crazy or worse, could lead someone towards an acher type of a reality where you're trying to understand things that are beyond you. But to ask about what's happened in the past, then what's the big deal? Who cares? How's that going to affect you if all you're doing is asking about the past? It doesn't really have any practical nafkamina. So therefore, what would be the real problem? How is that a bizayin and a kavod haboyrei to ask about what happened until now? So Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Lazar, the Amri Travayu, they say, it's like an example of a person, a king, who who says to his people, Banu li paltirin gedolin ala ashba. Go build me a beautiful palace on top of a garbage dump. Holchu ubanulo. So they went ahead and did so. Ein ritzon shel melech. The king clearly does not want lahaskir sham ashba to be reminded that his beautiful palace was built on a garbage dump. He wants to be reminded more of the beautiful palace, so to speak. Hashem created this beautiful world for us to ask questions about what existed before the world existed. It's like we're almost saying to Hashem, we don't care about this world. We want to know what was beforehand. It's the same way of being reminded that the beautiful home that someone has, they're being complimented for the land that was there beforehand and not for what they've built. Either way, says the Gemara Weiler, the Mishnah said, Kol shelichas al kavod kono, whoever does not have respect for the respect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, a person who does not have Rachmanas on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, better that he shouldn't be in this world, meaning a person cannot be mevaza HaKadosh Baruch Hu's covenant in the world, a person has to be marbik kvayt shemayim. So Mahi, what exactly does this mean? So there's two opinions. Rabbi Ava Omer Zeh HaMistakol B'Keshet, it's a person who stares at a rainbow. There's a Tosfos right over here that says it's dafka mistakel. It implies that it's because it's blurry and there's no clear lines, no clear differences, and that is the reason why a person. It's like a person who's staring at something blurry. It's like not clear. It's not covered of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Rav Yosef Amar Zeh ha'oiver aveira b'seiser. It's a person who does an aveira privately, which on a certain level, a person who does an aveira privately, although certainly it's worse to do it publicly, but an aveira privately has a unique problem in that what you're basically doing is you are showing HaKadosh Baruch Hu that although you care what other people think, you don't care what he thinks, right? So the Gemara says like this: Mistakol b'keshes, to stare at a rainbow. Where do we know that that's a problem? That it's a problem of being memayit kvayt shemayim dichsiv kimare hakesh asher yihi anon yom hageshem, like the image of the rainbow, which is in the sky in the clouds on a rainy day. Kain mara hanoga, so too is the vision of hanoga, like brightness or light, saviv, that surrounds which is the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and specifically the kavod of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you see that the keshes represents Kvod Hashem, and staring at it is disrespectful. Therefore, staring at a keshes is going to be something that a person is not chas al Kvod Kaina, and therefore he's no longer appropriate to be living in this world. Rav Yosef Amar Zeh ha'over avera b'seiser. We said, what is that like? And Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak, kol ha'over avera b'seiser, a person who does an avera privately is keilu doichek raglei shchina. It's like he pushes away Hashem's shchina in this world, specifically raglei shchina, like it says in the pasuk, Shnei Kayamar Hashem Hashemayim Kisi. We've quoted this pasuk a couple of times already. So Hashem says the Shemayim, the heavens are Kisi, that's where his throne is. V'ha'aretz Hadom Ragli, and the land, the ground, the Aretz is Hadom Ragli, the place for his foot or his feet, Kiviyachol, to reside, meaning to say that the Shechina, which is the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world that we experience, that Shechina is referred to as Ragli. Therefore, it's Doicha Ragli Shechina when a person does an Aveira privately. Now, what the Gemara seems to be saying is that a private Aveira, an Aveira B'Seiser, is so terrible that a person shouldn't do it. The implication is almost as if to say that doing it publicly would be better. Eini asked the Gemara, Ha'amar Rabbi Lo Hazakein Imroa Adam Sheyitzrim Bisgabrel, of a person sees that he's not able to control himself in an Aveira, Yelech Lamakam, Shein Makirim. So he should go to a place where no one knows him, meaning he should go to a private place. V'yilbash Chorin, he should wear dark clothing, black clothing. V'yisatev Chorin, he should wrap himself in black clothing. V'yasem Ashalibay Chafetz, and he should do whatever he wants. Meaning he should do the Aveira over there. Why? Because at least over there it'll be private. Ve'al Yechalul Sheim Shemayim B'Faresia, so that he shouldn't. So that he shouldn't be mevaza Kadosh Baruch Hu, should be mechal shem shemayim publicly. So what do you see from over here? You see from over here that doing it publicly is significantly worse than doing it privately, and we're saying that doing it privately is doicha raglei shchina. So which one is it? So Gemara says like kasha, not difficult. In one case, lehab damatzi kayaf leili yitzrei, when you can control yourself, meaning to say you have the ability to control yourself somewhat. Therefore, publicly better not to do it there and do it privately, right? Sorry, other way around. When you can control yourself. When you can't control yourself, that's where the Bryce is saying, when the Gemara is saying that you should at least go, and if you're going to do it privately. But if a person can control himself, then even privately he shouldn't do it, and therefore the two ideas go together. I'll just point out over here quickly. Tosfos over here, the second Tosfos on the daf, points out that it's mash from the Gemara that you should actually do the Aveira if you can't control yourself. He brings the Rabbeinu Hananel here, and Tosfos also brings it in Kiddushin. He brings it, I think, in Ma'it Katan as well. The Gemara says over there the same idea, that you should go and into a community that you don't know and wear all these clothing. Rabbeinu Hananel says that this is actually a suggestion of the Memra, is to go there And by wearing these clothing, by being in a place where you need others, it'll bring a person to tshuva, which will then perhaps help him to be ma'orer, not to do the avera. But either way, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nachmani bin Turkman in the Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yehuda and of the Talmud of Rabbi Nachmani darshaned and said over a Torah from the Turgaman, from the translator of Reish Lakish. We know all of the great Gedolim in those times, Amoraim would have a Meturgaman. A Meturgaman's job was basically to scream out the Torah that they would teach, so that they wouldn't have to lose their voice. Basically, the Meturgaman needed to be a Talmud Chacham. So they were saying over the Torah from the Turgaman, the Reish Lakish, and he said the following: Kol Mistakel, the Gimel Devarim, anyone who stares at three things, Ein of Kahos, his eyes dim, they become blind a little bit. Bekeshes, a person who stares at a rainbow like we saw earlier. Ubinasi, a person who stares at the Nasi. Uve Kohanim, and the Kohanim when they are duchering. Bekeshes, Dechsil Kimara Hakeshes Hashiyeba Anabiyam Hageshem, Humara Demus Kvaid Hashem, like we brought the pasuk before. That same pasuk shows you that it's referring to Kvaid Hashem. Staring at Kvaid Hashem is a bezayin to Kvaid Hashem. That's going to make your eyes dim. Nasi, where do we see that that's the case? This is talking about Moshe passing the hoid, the grandeur, the glory of Hashem that was on Moshe to Yehoshua, who was a Nasi to a Nasi. And you see over there that the Nasi has Kvaid Hashem on his face, and therefore a person who stares at a Nasi is like staring at the Shechina, and that is Lo Yorena Ha'adam V'chai, like we saw earlier. That's what happened with Ben Azai, that he saw Hashem. This is a me'ain of that. A person shouldn't stare. His eyes are going to go dim, like we say. A suma is chash of kemes. It's a little bit like Lo Yorani Adam V'chai. Mistakel, but Kohanim was the last one, that a person who stares at Kohanim is specifically referring to Bizman Beis HaMikdash Kaim, when the Beis HaMikdash was up, and Shahayu Omdim Al Duchanan, when they would stand on the platform and they would duchen and bless, Umivarchin and Yisrael B'Shem HaMefarish, they would use the special shame of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that was used by Berchas Kayanim. And during that time, they put their hands up in duchen. The kedusha of Hakadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, was on their fingertips. The Shechina was there, staring at their fingertips, would blind them or cause blindness. From here's the midig, to wrap yourself with the talis during Birchas Kayanim, to bring your children under it, to protect their eyes, so that you shouldn't chas shalom lose your eyesight. Says the Gemara, Vayter Darsha Yehuda Rabbi Nachmani Menturgim Minya the Reish Lakish, brought here obviously because it's the exact same story in terms of who said this. Ma'idich said, what is the understanding of the pasuk that says Al ta'aminu bereya, don't trust your friend. Al tiftachu be'olaf, and don't trust your friend. What does it mean? Bereya, although it's spelled bereya, could also be meant, can be read bera, ra, like evil, and therefore if you're Yetzer Hara, Chato says to you, do an Aveira, and not only that, v'hakadosh baruch hu moichel, meaning a unique type of taiva. The taiva that he's trying to get you to do is, don't worry, Hashem loves you, and he'll be moichel you even without tshuva, or perhaps even with tshuva. And he's saying it's mamish the case of a person who says, I'm going to do an Aveira, and don't worry, I'll do tshuva later, which we know that tshuva you cannot do, and that won't help you. Al ta'amin, that's what the pasuk means, al ta'aminu in that ra. Right? Shenemar al ta'aminu bereya, like we just said, ve'ein reya el yetzer hara. Shenemar, how do we know that yetzer hara is a reya? Ki yetzer leiv ma'odam ra resh ayin is like similar to reya. That word there tells us that yetzer, the desire of a person, is evil, and that evil inclination is the one that is convincing you to do this. Don't trust him. Now, the second part of the pasuk is ve'ein al tiftachu be'olof, which is a continuation of that pasuk. That's how we know that that's referring to the Hakadosh Baruch Hu Moichel part. Meaning, there's two parts here. It's don't trust the Yetzer Hara when he tells you to do an Aveira, and don't trust him in that he'll say that Hakadosh Baruch Hu will be Moichel you if you do tshuva, because in this scenario Hashem will not. Ve'ein Olof al Hakadosh Baruch Hu, and how do I know that's referring to Hakadosh Baruch Hu? Shenemar Olof Na'urei Ata, it's referring to Hashem as the Olof. Fine. Says the Gemara, Vayter Shema Timer, I might say, doing an Aveira in private, what's the big deal? Me may it be. Who's going to testify against me in Bezdin Shalmala? So tomorrow we'll see four opinions. Avnei Beis of V'Kairis Beis Shal Adam. Hema Eden, by the people, the things that are going to testify against him are the boards of his home, the bricks of his home. They are going to be made. They'll know what happens. Shenemar ki Evan Mikir Tizak, that a stone from the wall will scream out. The kapis and the branch may eitz Ya'anena will from a tree will either answer or testify against you. Ya'anena miloshin lo yisa'ana berecha et shakar. But either way, the point is that those things are going to testify because they're going to be able to see the things you did in private. Same story, I don't know with which Tana, Amayra, Rav, Talmud Chacham, I forget the story, but they said that they did so much chesed with their shulchan, with their table, when they were doing the machnias orech, when they had people over. They said, I want to be buried in my table. The wood of my table should be my coffin, so that it should be like an edus for me when I get the shemayim of all the chesed that I did. And if this is true for midas haparanus, so then obviously midas taivus, obviously it would even more. The thing that's going to testify against you is your neshama shenemar mi shecheves chekecha shemor pischepicha, from that is inside your chekecha, inside your chest, inside your bosom, whatever the word is. Shmar pischepicha, let it watch over the words that come out of your mouth. Meaning, what is this referring to? Ezo hi davar sheshecheches becheko shel adam, what resides inside of a person in his bosom. And the Yomi is a neshama. This must be referring to the neshama. So the neshama is going to be the thing that is shmar pischepicha, that will testify against you. Reb Zreika Omer, he says a different shot of what's going to testify against you. Shnei malachi asharis malavano, so that even though these shnei malachim are there to protect you, right? However, they also will, hey me'idin by, they're there all the time. It's like the Secret Service. They sort of know what's going on with the president. Their job is to protect, but in the end of the day, they get to know a lot of stuff. They get to see everything. They end up recording everything, and that's going to play on a video, on a loop for you when you get at the Shemaim. And where do we see that? Shenemar, like it says in the Pasuk, ki malachav yitzavelach, lishmorcha b'chol d'rachecha. You see that they're b'chol d'rachecha, they're there wherever you go, and therefore they're going to know everything. They'll be able to make it against you. Last one, chachamim oimrim, a varav shel adam me'idin by, his anatomy, his limbs, his entire body is going to testify against him. Shenemar, like it says, v'atem edai, you, meaning us, Klal Yisrael, we are the edai, the witnesses. Nu'um Hashem v'ani kel, and Hashem says, and I am God. Meaning to say, we're the ones who are going to be the witnesses for our own Averis. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah Vayter. We're back to a little bit of discussion, back to Hilchas Chagiga, Karbanis. We're talking here about the Hilchas, the halachas of Smicha. Smicha is a halacha that a person, when he brought a carbon yachid, not a carbon sibur, a carbon yachid, a person needed to go and lean on the animal. And when he leaned on the animal, depending on what type of carbon it was, he had to say certain things. If it was a carbon chatas or a carbon asham, he'd have to actually say the vidui. If it was a carbon shlamim, so there's no vidui, he would just say shavach, he would say praise of Hashem. But either way, it needed to be done before the carbon. And we'll see over here that is a machlekes. In fact, Rashi speaks out over here that this Mishnah, tucked away right here in Tev Zayin and Aleph and Chagiga, is the very first machlekes l'shem shemayim that existed, although Tosfos asks from Shaul and David HaMelech in other inyanim, but it seems that this was a machlekes that was l'doros. It went from one generation to the next. That's a machlekes about what to do. This was the beginning of machlekes. This Mishnah is going to mention over here 5 pairs or zugais that we know from Pirkei Avos, that one was a Nasi and one was an Av Bezdin, and that was during their time how the Gedolim ruled. You had the Nasi, who was considered the biggest of the Chachamim, and then the second biggest Chacham would be the Av Bezdin. And they each had different responsibilities, but the point is, the rule generally was that the Av Bezdin wouldn't paskin shailas in front of the Nasi, because the Nasi was the one who was greater. It would only paskin shailas when the Nasi was not around. And we'll see in the Gemara why that's relevant. The Mishnah is about to list off that 5 of these pairs each argued over this question about whether the halacha is that we do smicha on Yantiv. Now, why would you think you can't do smicha on Yantiv? Meaning, normally smicha on the weekday would be completely mutter. Not only mutter, you'd have a chiv to do it whenever you have a carbon. So, just to speak out briefly, is that there's a halacha that you're not allowed to use an animal on Shabbos or Yantiv. It's a shvus. It's an issa derabanan. You're not allowed to ride a behema. Not allowed to ride a behema also extends to not pressing on the animal, being somech on the animal. That would also be an aveira of shvus, a shvus on Yantiv. Now, what do we do when you have a shvus that's also a mitzvah? So you have the mitzvah of smicha and you have the shvus kenegdai. Do we say that the mitzvah smicha is going to push it off or not? That is the simplest way to understand the machlokes about whether we say that there is a din smicha on Yantiv or not. Meaning, if we say that you're somech, it means that the mitzvah of smicha pushes off the aveira. And if we say there's no smicha, it's that we say the aveira is intact. And just to take it one step further, what it really means is there's a machlekes, and there's a machlekes in the Gemara, not here, but in other places, where what exactly is the understanding between the ones who say that there's smicha on Yontiv or not, is do we say that smicha needs to be done immediately right before the shechita of a carbon or not? So now, if you hold that it's required right before and you can't do it earlier, then since you need to bring the carbon up and the carbon is mutter, smicha will get brought into that heter, and therefore you'll be allowed to even do smicha on Yontiv. Whereas if you hold that the smicha could be done beforehand, then you could do the smicha technically before Yontiv, and then when you bring the carbon on Yontiv, you could bring the carbon. So since that option is available to you, so therefore the machlokes about whether you do smicha on Yontiv will simply be, if you hold that you need to do the smicha right before the carbon, then the smicha will be doched the shvus, and then the halach would be you do smicha on Yantiv. And if the halacha is that you hold that you can do the smicha beforehand, you'll have no necessity to do the smicha right before. You could right before the shechita. You could do it earlier, and therefore the smicha would not be doched the shvus because it's optional. You could always just do it beforehand, and that's one way to learn the machlekes. There is another way to learn the machlekes, and this is relevant as we'll get to the Gemara, which is no. Everyone agrees that the smicha that's done is exactly right before the shechita, and there's no question about it. that if this animal requires smicha, the smicha must be done right before, and it'll be docha the shvus, no questions asked. What's the machlekes about whether we do smicha on Yontif or not? Is do we say that the din smicha, which in the psukim is specifically taught about voluntary karbonos, about shalmei nedava are optional karbonos, it says you need to do a smicha. Do we extend that halacha of requiring smicha even to obligatory private karbanos? And an example of that would be a carbon chagiga, which is a private carbon that is obligatory. It's a carbon chiyuv. Do we say that it even has a chiyuv smicha? So if you say that there is a chiyuv smicha, then, like we said earlier, then the halacha is going to be that, of course, you would go ahead and do that smicha on Yontif, because the only way to do the carbon would be, the only way to do the smicha, would be right before the carbon. And since that's the case, the halacha would be that it would be mutter on Yontif. Whereas if you hold that there is no chiyuv to do smicha by an obligatory carbon, then the halacha would be that since the smicha is not required, it would therefore be usher because of shvus. That's the other way to learn the machlekes. Now we're going to see in the Gemara that these two mahalchim, and the maskana of the Gemara is a question about how to understand this machlekes, and in our Gemara it's going to become relevant, which is why I'm elaborating a little bit now as we're about to get into the Mishnah. So now let's read the Mishnah. We're going to see 5 pairs. Each pair had this machlekes, and we'll get to the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Yosi ben Yoezer, Oimer Shaloi Lismach. He says not to do smicha. Yosef ben Yochanan Omer Lismach. He says to do smicha. Yehoshua ben Prachia Oimer Shaloi Lismach. He says, Yehoshua ben Prachia says, you shall not do smicha. Nitoy Ha'arbeli Omer Oimer Lismach. He says you should do smicha. Yehuda ben Taboy Oimer Shaloi Lismach. Shimon ben Shetach Oimer Lismach. That's the third one. Shmaya Oimer Lismach. Shmaya says to do smicha. Avtalion Oimer Shaloi Lismach. And Hillel Menachem, we'll get to who Menachem is in a second. Loi Nechliku, they didn't argue. It seems that everyone agreed over there that you do smicha. However, Yotza Menachem left, and then in his place came Shammai, Nichnas Shammai, and then Hillel and Shammai had the 5th machlekes, and Shammai Oimer Shaloi Lismach, and Hillel Oimer Lismach. So again, we have 5 different opinions. The first 3, and this will be important as we get to the following Gemara in a minute, the first 3 opinions, the first Tana who's mentioned, all held don't do smicha on Yontif. And the ones they argued said do smicha, and in the last 2, the first one mentioned Shmaya and Hillel both say to do smicha on Yontif, and the second ones that are mentioned are saying to not do that. Now, why is that important? We'll see in the Gemara that that's a question. Says the Mishnah Weiter. The Mishnah says as follows: Harishonim hayu nesiim. The first ones mentioned in the Mishnah, those 5 pairs, are all the Nesiim. They're the bigger Gedolim. Ushniim lahem, and the second ones there are the Avos Bezdin. They're the Av Bezdins. And we'll see in the Gemara whether that's the case or not. And what we're going to see is that of the 5 pairs, again, Yosi ben Yoezer with Yosi ben Yochanan, then there's Yehoshua ben Prachia and Itoya Arbeli, Yehuda ben Taboy and Shimon ben Shetach, there's Shmaya and Avtalia, and then there's Hillel and Shammai. We're going to see that everyone agrees who the Nasi was and who the Avbezdin was, except for one, the middle case of Yehuda ben Taboy and Shimon ben Shetach. Meaning, we're going to see one opinion that holds that Yehuda ben Taboy is the Nasi and Shimon ben Shetach is the Avbezdin. That's going to be the sheet of Rav Meir. And then we're going to see another opinion of the Chachamim that it was the opposite, that really Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi and Yehuda ben Taboy, he was the Avbezdin. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, Shloisha mizugas harishonim she'amru shelo lismoch, u'shnayim mizugas ha'achronim she'amru lismoch. So says the Braisa, like we explained it earlier, 3 from the first pair who say not to do smicha. So the very first 3 cases, the first one mentioned, who said that smicha is asur on Yontif. Ushnayim, and 2 from Zugas HaAchronim, from the second pair is mentioned, meaning this would be referring to Sha'amru Lismach, who said to do smicha on Yontif. This would be Shmaya and Hillel. Hayu Nesiim, they were the Nesiim, and their bar pluktas, Ushniim lahem Avos Bezdin, the ones who argued with them, they were the Av Bezdin. And again, the nafkamina is going to be that the Avbezdin is not allowed to paskin a shaila in front of the Nasi. Different Rav Meir, this is the opinion of Rav Meir, like we explained, that Yehuda ben Taboy is a Nasi and holds that smicha on Yontif is aser, and Shimon ben Shetach is the Avbezdin and paskin that smicha on Yontif is mutter. Says the Gemara, the Chachamim Omrim, they argue, Yehuda ben Taboy Avbezdin, he says Yehuda ben Taboy is the Avbezdin, and Shimon ben Shetach Nasi, he is the Nasi, meaning that's the machlekes. Gemara says, if that's the case, man tana laha de tana rabbanan. Who is the author of the following brisa? The brisa says, Amr Rabbi Yehuda ben Taboy. It's a nice story over here. We're going to see. Amr Rabbi Yehuda ben Taboy. Erev ben Nechama, he says, I make a shvua, im leharagti eit zoymim, lohitzi miliban shal tzdukim. Meaning to say, quick hakdama. Eid zomim, Eidim zomimin. When we get to Makas Mitzvah Shem, we'll discuss it in more detail. But Eidim zomimin is basically the halacha that if you have two Eidim who make some type of testimony about a certain event, let's say Reuven killed Shimon or Reuven borrowed money from Shimon, whatever their testimony is, if two other Eidim now come and say that Reuven and Shimon, the first two Eidim, could not have possibly made the Eidus that they're making as true Eidus, because the time they say they saw what they saw, they were with us in a certain place and at a certain time. Meaning, they don't come to say that they're testifying differently than the first Eidim. They come to say that the Eidim, the original Eidim, were with us at that time. What that is that's called an Eid Zomim, and there's a unique halacha for an Eid Zomim, is that the halacha is the Eidim Zomimin, the punishment when those two second Eidim come to punish, the punishment for the first Eidim is that they receive the punishment of whoever they were testifying about. So if they were testifying about the person that he's going to be chayiv money, they'll be chayiv money. If they were testifying that he'll get malchus, they get malchus. And if chas v'sholom, if they were testifying about someone that he's chayiv misa, then the halacha is we kill the Eidim because of this halacha of Eidim Zomimin. Now there's a very important caveat to this halacha, which is the pasuk says of asisam lo, what you do to them, kasher zamam, like they tried to do. The implication is that only like they tried to do and not that they actually did, meaning to say that the punishment of the person who they testified about was never carried out, but it was paskin in Bezdin that it should be chayiv. It's very important. It can't be that there was no psak din, and it can't be that there was a carrying out of the punishment. It has to be that middle status. They tried to make it happen, and it has not yet come to fruition. And at that point, the second pair of Eidim come in and say, they were with us on that day and at that time. They are now called Eidim Zomimin, and the halach is they get the punishment of whatever they were trying to do. Now, with that hakdama, says the Gemara like this: Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai says, "I take a shvua im lo haragti eid zomim if I did not kill an eid zomim." Meaning, he's saying, I held that it was proper to kill an eid zomim, and I did it in order lahotzi miliban shel tzdukim. Now, another point that's really important here is that typically eidim zomimin can only be given their punishment zomimin if both of the Eidim were testified about. So if the second pair of Eidim come in and say that both of those Eidim were with us on that time and that day, then the halacha is this entire technique of Eidim zomimin and the punishment that's meted out to them is going to work. However, what happens if the two Eidim come in and say one of the Eidim was with us on that day, the other Eid we can't speak to? This would be not a full Eidim zomimim. That's Eid zomim echad, not Eidim zomim shtayim. So the halacha is then in that case it doesn't apply, and we don't apply this rule of asisim lo kasher zama, and says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai that even though that was the case, I went ahead and killed one of the Eidim and paskin that he should be chayiv misa, despite the fact that that's really not the halacha, and I did it in order to refute the opinion of the tzdukim, who were known to only darshan psukim and not care about Torah Shabbal Peh, and they understood that the din of kasher zamam will apply even won't apply unless it was they learn out from Sukkim Shayu Omrim Ein Eidim Zomim and Heroganachi Yaharaga Nidon. They had a different understanding of Asisim Lo Kasher Zama. They understood that the only reason why we kill the two Eidim when they're Eidim Zomim is if they actually succeeded in having their testimony carried out. So if the person who was being on trial was brought, let's say, a murder case, and he was killed, only then do we kill the Eidim. But if they never succeeded in doing it, therefore they wouldn't be killed. So says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai, in order to express that the tzdukim are wrong, that al pitor shabal peh, it's specifically kasher zamam lasos, but they didn't actually they weren't able to get the person killed. It's only then that we apply this rule of kasher zamam. In order to prove that the tzdukim were wrong, says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai, I killed this eid echad and not both eidim, even though this would be a classic case where you wouldn't apply the din of hazama, because since he was an eid echad and not shtayim that were proved to be eidim zomimin, really he shouldn't have been killed. So really, what Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai did was he incorrectly paskin misa on this eid in order to protect the Mesorah that the tzdukim should be shown that they're wrong. And Reforshim speak out over here that really Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai had a justification for doing this. He was allowed to do this. The question was, should he have done it or not? Meaning, why was he allowed to do this? Because Bezdin has this kayach to be able to paskin capital cases. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai must have paskin this shaila, and for whatever reason, he decided that he should do it. However, Amr Loi Shimon ben Shetach, his associate, Shimon ben Shetach, said to him, Ereb ben Nechama, he also took a shvur. And what did he say back? Im loy shafacht dam naki. He's basically saying, the shvur I'm taking is that it sounds to me like you killed someone innocent. You took innocent blood. Shaharei amru chachamim, for didn't the rabbis not teach us, ein edim zomimin, neheragin ad sheyazum ushneim, like we explained earlier, that you don't kill edim zomimin until both of them are zomimim. Ve'ein lokin, and we don't hit them with malchus ad sheyazum ushneim until both of them are proved to be edim zomimin. Ve'ein mishalmin mammon, and we don't make them pay what they tried to make the person on trial paying until both of them are found to be zomimin, like we explained earlier, not if one of them was found to be zomimin. Therefore, what you did by killing just that one aid, when he was an aid zomim, when his partner in witness was not an aid zomim, since you killed him, you did shelo kedin, not like what the chachamim said. So in that moment, this machlekes about whether he should or shouldn't have killed, Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai realized he was wrong. And miyad kibul alav Yehuda ben Tabai, Yehuda ben Tabai decided in that moment to change. She'ena mayra halacha, he wouldn't teach any halacha ella bifnei Shimon ben Shetach, only in front of Shimon ben Shetach, right? And kol yom shel Yehuda ben Tabai, all of the days of Yehuda ben Tabai, he would go to the grave of the person of that aid who he killed. The innocent blood was spilled. And the voice of the mace, or maybe perhaps the call of Yehuda ben Tabai was heard. People thought that it's the call, the voice of the person who was murdered, screaming out. But really, Amr Lahem, he says, no, Koli, who it's my voice, and I'll prove it to you, Tedu, Shalamacher, who mace, because there's going to come a point when he'll die, and Ve'ein Kolo Nishma, and you'll no longer hear it, meaning to say that it'll no longer be heard because he won't be there anymore. Amr Le Ravacha Brei the Rava Ravashi, they said, 1 second, what's the proof just because you die that it's your voice? Maybe by you dying, it means now that his voice will no longer call out. V'tilma Piusi Paise, by you dying, or before you dying, you were able to be Matthias him, you were able to assuage him, and therefore he's no longer crying out. Oibid Dine Taboy, or maybe perhaps now in Shemayim that you're there, you're being taken to Bezdin Shalmala, so therefore he doesn't have to cry anymore because din is being given out. But either way, this long brisa, what is the brisa basically effectively saying? That Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai said he killed the one aid. And Shimon ben Shetach said, no, you shouldn't have done that only when it's two. And then Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai was makabel upon himself from that moment on because of the mistake that he made, that he's not going to paskin any shilas from here on out unless it's in front of Shimon ben Shetach. That sounds like, until this moment, he would paskin shilas on his own. And he would paskin shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach. The implication is that the only way he would do that is if he's the nasi, because like we explained earlier in the Mishnah, that the halacha is that a nasi is allowed to paskin shilas in front of an av bezdin, but an av bezdin who is on a lower level is not allowed to paskin shilas in front of the nasi. It's bizayon. You always should defer to the greater person in the room. So from the fact that he was makabel upon himself a new behavior, a new hanhaga of only paskin shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach, right? Must be up until now he did it this way and he did it that way, and now he's continuing to do it in front of him. It's because he's the nasi. So the Gemara says, money. Who is this brisa? Money ha. Reb Meir. It's like Reb Meir that Yehuda ben Tabai is the nasi and Shimon ben Shetach is the av bezdin. Amr Shimon ben Shetach av bezdin. Reb Yehuda ben Tabai nasi. Haida de kamayri halacha bifnei Shimon ben Shetach. It makes sense that going now he's only going to be paskening shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach because he's allowed to, because he's the nasi. If you say it's like the Rabbanan, then that really what? The Amr Yehuda ben Tabai av bezdin. That Yehuda ben Tabai was on the second in command, and Shimon ben Shetach nasi, he was in first in command. Av bezdin b'fnei nasi mimayra halacha. Does it make sense to say that until now, what was happening? He was passing shilas not in front of him and in front of him, and now he's going to go ahead and pass shilas in front of him? How can he pass shilas in front of him? Shimon ben Shetach, according to the Chachamim, Shimon ben Shetach is the nasi. So how could Yehuda ben Tabai go ahead and pass shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach? Elamai, it looks like it's going to have to be that the price is only going according to Reb Meir. The Gemara says lo. No, lo, it could be going according to the Chachamim. And maybe Yehuda ben Tabai is the Abezdin and Shimon ben Shetach is the Nasi. And this that Yehuda ben Tabai is saying that I'm going to change my behavior and now only do it in front of Shimon ben Shetach, he doesn't mean that he's going to pass shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach, because he can't do that, because he's the Abezdin. What does he mean? My kibbel alav dekamer. What does it mean that he's saying from now on I'm only going to do it with Shimon ben Shetach? Meaning litzrufe. I'm only going to join a bezdin if Shimon ben Shetach is there, and he'll protect me from making the mistakes like I made before. That I would not be mitzaref to a bezdin unless Shimon ben Shetach is there. But paskening shilas in front of Shimon ben Shetach he won't do. We'll hold over here on that Gemara. The Gemara is now going to go weiter and discuss a little bit the halachas of smicha. Says the Gemara, Yotza Menachem v'nichnas Shammai. It said in the Mishnah that before we get to the dinim of smicha, that Hillel and Shammai is machlekes. Before we get there, we have the machlekes, or the pair of Hillel and Menachem. Who is this Menachem? Says the Gemara, La'echen Yotza. It says he went out. Where did he go? Abaye Amar Yotza l'tar b'sra. He went off the derech. Rava Amar Yotza l'avodas hamelech. He went to go do the avodah of the king. The mashmos is that perhaps he was a Talmud Chacham and he wanted to go work in government and politics. It's not mashma from the second answer that he went off the derech. Adarabba, it's mashma that he wanted to work for the king and on behalf of the Jews and to protect the Talmidei Chachamim of his time. He felt he was more of an askin than a loimed, more of an askin than a paisik. Therefore, he went ahead and did that. But either way, Abaye and Rava are arguing over this. And Tanya Nami Hachid did the opinion of Rava that he went to work for the king, because it says Yotza Menachem La'avodas Hamelech. The Brisa says that he went out to work for the king. Yotza Imay Shmonim Zugos Talmidim, and he took with him 80 pairs of Talmidim, Levushin Sirikin, that they were wearing silk robes like kings. Amar of Shemin Bar Ava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan La'olam Al Tehei Shvus Kala Beinecha. Says Rabbi Yochanan, a very important halacha: a person should never treat a shvus, the din d'Rabbanan, on Shabbos and Yontiv, lightly in your eyes. And what's the reason why you shouldn't? Shaharei Smicha, this din Smicha, which is a mitzvah, is going to be usher, according to some opinions, on Yontiv, even though it's a mitzvah. Eina Ela Mishum Shvus, it's only an Isser Shvus, and yet still V'nech L'Kuba Gedei L'Hadar. There are those who still hold that it's usher on Yontiv, even though it's a mitzvah. It's a Mefurish Mishnah. Mishnah says that the Mishnah is in Beya. It says that that smicha is going to be usher. There's opinions this way, and there's opinions that way, but it says you're not allowed to ride on a behema. It says you're not allowed to do you're not allowed to do smicha. Somewhere it says no. The chiddush is shvus mitzvah itzrichalei. It's coming to teach me that even when it's a mitzvah, it's usher. On that, the Gemara says, what do you mean? Hanami pshita. That's also mefurish in the Mishnah. So what do you mean to say Rabbi Yochanan telling me a chiddush that smicha is a shvus? I know this already. It's a mefurish Mishnah. What's he saying? That you don't take it lightly? I know what he's saying is a mefurish Mishnah. The Gemara says you're right. What he's coming to specifically explain is how to understand the machlekes of our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Beya about whether a person should or shouldn't do smicha on Yontif. Meaning to say what? Is lafuki mimanda amar b'smicha gufa pligi, kamash malan b'shvusu de pligi. Like we explained earlier, that there's two ways to understand the machlokas of whether to do smicha on Yontif or not. Possibility number one is everyone agrees that smicha by a carbon chagiga, even though it's an obligatory carbon, is chayiv. Everyone agrees you have a chayiv to do smicha on that. What's the machlekes? The machlekes is do we say that the smicha must be done right before the shechita, or can it be done earlier? So the opinions who hold that you do smicha on Yontiv hold that you cannot do smicha, or you should not do smicha earlier than possible, and really it should be done right before shechita. So since smicha, which you have a chayiv to do with this carbon, needs to be right before shechita, and the shechita is allowed to be done on Yontiv, therefore the smicha is going to be mutter. Those are the opinions of the people who hold that it's mutter. Whereas the opinion who holds that you shouldn't do smicha on Yontiv, they're going to hold that smicha can be done earlier. And since you have the option of doing smicha earlier, therefore the halacha is going to be that you don't do the smicha on Yontiv, rather you do it before, right? And Rabbi Yochanan is coming to say that is the understanding of the machlekes. And it's coming to say that it's kamash malan b'shvus hu de pligi. They're arguing in shvus. Meaning, do we say that the smicha can be done earlier, in which case then you have a problem with shvus? Or do we say, no, you can't do it earlier and the shvus is going to be doicha? Meaning, what's the shaila? The shaila is, are we docha the shvus or are we not docha the shvus? That's the way that Rabbi Yochanan is saying the halacha. And who is that not like? That's la'afuki mimanda amr b'smicha gufa pligi. It's coming to say that the halacha is not, or the explanation of the machlekes is not like the manda amr who holds that they're arguing in smicha itself. Meaning to say what? That do we say that there's even a din smicha to begin with by private korbanos that are chiyuvim, that are obligatory? Because like we said earlier, the din smicha was said specifically by carbon nadava, shlomim of nadava, of voluntary karbanos, and this carbon chagiga is a carbon chiyuv. So is there a chiyuv smicha to begin with? Enechanami, if there is a chiyuv smicha, hakol modem the halacha is going to be that you do it on Yontif. The shaila is there even a mitzvah to begin with? So the Manda Amr who says that you do smicha on Yontif clearly holds that the mitzvah smicha is said by both a voluntary and a obligatory carbon, and therefore we're going to push off the shvus. Whereas the shita who holds you don't do it on Yontif is not because of a shvus problem, but rather because of a smicha problem. They hold that there is no chiyuv smicha to begin with. So this that you would want to do a smicha on Yontif would be entirely optional. And therefore it's an optional thing that we're certainly not going to allow you to do. And yes, the reason is going to be because it's a shvus on Yontif, but they're not arguing in shvus, they're arguing in smicha, and Rabbi Yochanan holds that that's not the machlekes. Says the Gemara Weiler, if this is the case, that the machlekes between the people who hold smicha on Yontif and the ones who say no smicha on Yontif is like Rabbi Yochanan says, that it's just a question of whether we do the smicha right before shechita or not, it'll come out. The entire reason why they're arguing is whether we'll apply shvus or not to the situation, right? Meaning, can one do the carbon with smicha on yantif, even though it's a shvus? If that's the case, and we're saying there are those who say it's usr, and there are those who are saying it's mutter, Amar Rami Babar Chama, Shma Mina from this, that smicha b'chol kocho, but it must be that when we do smicha, one must push down on the head of the animal as hard as possible. Because if it was possible to say that the smicha could be done with a light pressing, the isal kadaitach loy be'ina b'chol kocho, because if the halacha would be that you don't even need to do it b'chol kocho, then my covet, then why force them to even do smicha? Everyone should say do smicha. Lismach, just do it lightly. If you could be yot to the mitzvah smicha by doing it lightly, you wouldn't be over on the shvus at all. Hakol modim that it's going to be mutter, right? Elamai must be that you have to push down hard. Ask the Gemara Meisvei, I'll prove to you from a brisa that that's not the case. Says the Mishnah, says the brisa, sorry, Daber al b'nei Yisrael. The first pasuk says, speak to all of b'nei Yisrael. V'samach, the fourth pasuk says, v'samach edu smicha. You see that smicha is being spoken to who? To b'nei Yisrael, not to Benos Yisrael. So says the Gemara, B'nei Yisrael somchin ve'in Benos Yisrael somchos. You see, it's only something for men, not for women. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, they change the gears here. They say no. Benos Yisrael somchos for shus. If they want to, they can. If they don't want to, they don't have to. But again, the point is, it's a machlek is about whether women are chayiv and smicha or not. And zok the brayse of Weiler, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Sachli Abba Elazar. My father Elazar told me the following. Pam achas. Tells him a story. One time, we had our carbon chagiga, we had our shlamim, and we were going to bring it up as a carbon. Before we brought it up as a carbon, we brought it to the Ezra's Nashim where the women were standing. And the women did smicha over there. Now he was telling him over that they did this smicha by the women, and he specifically explained why they brought it to the women to do it. Not because he's of the opinion that women are chayiv in smicha, but rather to allow them to do it. Listen, maybe they paid for it, whatever it is. They paid for the carbon, so they wanted to have some sort of an involvement. So he brought it to them, but not because they're chayiv in it. Now the Gemara is bothered. From this brayse, it's mashma v'isa katayt smicha b'chol kocha b'inyan. If you're going to tell me that smicha requires pushing down on the head of the animal with a tremendous amount of force and not just a light pressure, then mishum nachas ruach the noshim avdina navoda bekachim, it comes out that you're taking this basically not just optional, completely unnecessary smicha. It's only being done to assuage their ego or just make them feel like they're part of the game over here. You're going to allow them to do a full forced push on the head. That full force push, that smicha b'koach, is going to be utilizing animals which are hegdish. You're not allowed to do any avoda. You're not allowed to do any malacha with an animal if it's a hegdish animal. And pushing down on the animal, that'll already be called doing avoda. So it must be, from this brayse, you see that the smicha that's done is a light smicha. Therefore, it's not avoda b'kachim, and therefore the reason why he was okay bringing it over to the ladies, despite the fact that they're not mechuyev, was really just to give them a nachas ruach, to just make them feel better, because really what they were doing was not a problem. So therefore, it's a kasha. Because how could you tell me that you want to prove to me that smicha has to be b'chol koichay? From here, you see clearly that it doesn't have to be b'chol koichay. It can be a light pressure. Elolav shmamina loy be'inim b'chol koichay, says the Gemara. Gemara says no. Lo'oy lo'em alach be'inim b'chol koichay. Maybe taka, like we said from Rabbi Yochanan, and we're learning from Rabbi Yochanan that you really need to do push down entirely. And you asked me, but that sounds like you're saying that we're allowing her to do it, even though she's doing malacha with kachim. The amr lahu akfu yadaychu, where the case is where when he brought the animal to the woman, he said, don't do a normal smicha, just do like a light pressure. And therefore, it's not a problem. And why is he telling them to do that? Just, nachas ruach, just to be yotzei. Iachi, says the Gemara, lo mipnei shesmicha benashim. It'll come out that when he said lo mipnei shesmicha benashim, which is mashma, that he was saying the reason he was trying to explain to them was, I wasn't bringing the smicha there because smicha is chayiv by women. There's no reason to say that. Meaning, if all they were doing was just pressing lightly, then there's no mistake to think that women would be chayiv. The only reason why he'd be doing it is for nachas ruach. Kepik leid the ena l'smicha klal. What he's having them do isn't even called smicha. Gemara says, Amar Rab Ami, Chada b'od kamer, he's saying two things. Chada, the first thing he was saying is the less l'smicha klal, that this act isn't even called real smicha because it's just a light pressure. The od, and not only that, because they last was nachas ruach l'noshim, the only reason why he's even doing that is in order to make the women feel happy that they're involved, but therefore you'd have no raya from that brisa that you need, that you don't do smicha b'chol kocha, but rather we would conclude that you actually do smicha b'chol kocha, which is how we pass it. Amra papa shmamina, another thing that comes out from this din of Rabbi Yochanan, that it's because of shmuz. He holds like this. Stadin asurin. We know that there's a shaila about whether the iser of the shvus with the animal is only on the top of the animal or even on the sides of the animal. Now, why would there be a problem on the sides or not? Because you might say that it's only a part of the animal that's utilized, like the top where someone would walk or someone would sit on the animal, the seat of the animal, whereas on the side of the animal or on the head of the animal, which is not a place that's typically utilized, you would think that it's mutter. And from here you see that l'tzdadin it's aser. Now, why is that? Because since you hold it's because of an isser of shvus, because if the halacha would be that you're allowed to utilize the side of the animal, then the head of the animal is no different than the side because it's an area that's not typically used, then the halacha should be lismach l'tzdadin, and we should allow you to do smicha on the head, which isn't considered utilizing an animal. That's not considered an isser. The only isser would be roichav ala behema, to ride it. So why is it even usher to begin with? From the fact that Rabbi Yochanan says that it's also mishum shvus, must be that even l'tzdadin is going to be a problem. Elolav shmamina tzadin asurin. So says the Gemara, I have a raya. So Ravashi Amar, no. Afilu tema tzadin mutar. And you could say that la'olam, the sides of the animal are mutar, and the head of the animal is still going to be asur, and there's no raya that's to the tzadin, because maybe the head is not like the sides, maybe the head is like the back of the animal, because kol de bahade gava, anything that is on the same level with the back, meaning if you just draw a line across the back of the animal, it's going to go to the head. It's on the same madrega, therefore it's kegava dami. The head is equal to the back, and therefore just like the back is a place you'd ride, and that's going to be awesome with the rabbanon, so too doing smicha on the head is going to be awesome with the rabbanon, and it could very well be that doing anything on the sides of the animal, which is not used at all, that'll be mutter because there's no isser shvus there, and la'olam, there's no raya one way or the other. We'll hold over here. We'll pick up from the Mishnah, Mir Hashem, tomorrow, Beis Shammai Oimrim, where we're going to be discussing the continuation of the din of smicha for one more daf and a half, and then we'll get to Yud Ches, Mir Hashem, we'll start Tumah V'Tara.